Have you ever heard of a place so vibrant it was called Black Wall Street? Imagine a community brimming with joy, success, and opportunity. A place where people found pride, where Black-owned businesses flourished, and where dreams seemed boundless. Welcome to Greenwood, a neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where African Americans defied the odds to build one of the most prosperous Black communities in America. But on one fateful night in 1921, all of that was reduced to ashes. This is the story of the Tulsa Race Massacre, a story that remains a tragic yet resilient chapter in American history. The question of what to label the 1921 incident has been up for debate in recent years. It has been referred to as the Tulsa Race Riot in the past. According to others, that moniker was given to it at the time for insurance reasons. Insurance companies were exempt from paying benefits to the residents of Greenwood, whose houses and businesses were destroyed, since it was declared a riot. At the period, it was also typical to classify any significant conflict between several racial or ethnic groups as a race riot. Let's set the stage. In the early 1900s, segregation laws kept many Black Americans out of white neighborhoods. But Greenwood stood apart. It wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. By early 1921, Tulsa was a modern metropolis with a population of more than 100,000. Most of the city's 10,000 African American people lived in the Greenwood district, a thriving neighborhood that was home to 2 newspapers, several churches, a library branch, and scores of Black-owned businesses. Greenwood had its own businesses, banks, schools, restaurants, churches, theaters, and even luxury hotels, offering opportunities in ways unheard of for Black communities of the time. With so much success, Greenwood had earned the nickname Black Wall Street. And it wasn't just about money. Greenwood was a place of pride and ambition, where generations could grow, flourish, and build something lasting. But this success didn't sit well with everyone. Racial tensions in Tulsa were high, and while Greenwood's residents worked tirelessly to create a better future, many white residents looked on with jealousy, suspicion, and fear. Fueled by segregation and racism, a bubbling resentment simmered just below the surface. Tensions between Black and white residents were already on edge, and all it took was one spark to ignite a wildfire. That spark came on May 30, 1921, with a single elevator ride. Dick Rowland, a 19-year-old Black shoe shiner, entered an elevator operated by Sarah Page, a 17-year-old white girl. What exactly happened between them isn't clear, but reports suggest that Rowland might have accidentally tripped or brushed against Page. The next thing anyone knew, Page screamed. What should have been an awkward but minor incident turned into something much darker as rumors swirled throughout Tulsa. And the local newspaper ran a sensational headline accusing Rowland of assault. The story spread like lightning. Within hours, outrage filled the streets of Tulsa. Rowland was arrested and taken to the courthouse, but a mob quickly gathered outside, demanding his release. An angry crowd ready to take justice into their own hands. News of this gathering reached Greenwood, and members of the Black community, many of them veterans of World War I, decided they couldn't stand by while Rowland's life was in danger. Determined to protect him, they arrived at the courthouse, armed and ready to defend one of their own. Following Dick Rowland's arrest, Black Tulsans had every reason to think he would be lynched. This is largely due to the extremely high crime rates and the city being plagued by vigilantism, including the lynching that occurred in August 1920 when a teenager accused of murder was reportedly lynched by a mob. Although Rowland's charges were initially deemed very questionable and were later dropped, the Black community had reasons to assume that they alone were responsible for his safety, just as they were for their own and their community's security. The officials did nothing to stop or limit the hostile factions as they gathered, and their agitations grew more intense. What happened next was a tipping point. The white mob and Greenwood's defenders stood face to face, tension so thick it was almost palpable. Then, a gun went off. No one knows exactly how it started, but that single gunshot sparked one of the most violent confrontations in American history. In the chaos that followed, the white mob exploded with rage, moving en masse towards Greenwood, bent on destruction. For the next 24 hours, Greenwood was engulfed in an unimaginable wave of violence. White mobs looted homes, setting fire to buildings that had taken years to build. Some survivors later recalled how airplanes flew overhead, dropping incendiary devices on the neighborhood, turning what had been homes, businesses, and dreams into smoldering ruins. Residents tried to flee for their lives, but the violence seemed unstoppable. Black Tulsans bravely fought to defend their homes, businesses, and community, despite being numerically inferior. However, the white invaders ultimately outnumbered the African American population of the city. By the time the smoke cleared, Greenwood lay in ruins. In just one night, an estimated 35 blocks had been reduced to rubble. Hundreds of lives were lost, and thousands were left homeless. Black Wall Street, a symbol of Black success, community, and hope, had been shattered. Families who had once enjoyed prosperity and security were now left with nothing but grief, loss, and devastation. After Greenwood was systematically destroyed, the victims of that destruction were ultimately left to restore it. Although several outside aid offerings were rejected by Tulsa officials, several Americans helped the city's now virtually homeless Black population. However, the most persistent relief effort was undertaken by the American Red Cross, which stayed in Tulsa for months after the massacre. The city's response only added to the tragedy. Instead of helping the survivors rebuild, Tulsa's leaders placed the blame on Black residents, accusing them of inciting the violence. Insurance companies refused to cover the damage, arguing that it was a riot, not a massacre. Many survivors, left with nowhere to go, were forced into makeshift camps or left Tulsa altogether. For years, the massacre was swept under the rug, silenced by a society that didn't want to face the truth. Greenwood's story nearly vanished from history, hidden away from textbooks, classrooms, and public knowledge. But Greenwood's spirit wasn't so easily destroyed. Over time, survivors and their descendants fought to preserve their stories and keep the memory of Black Wall Street alive. The massacre left deep wounds, but it also left a legacy of resilience, a refusal to let this tragedy fade into obscurity. Through hard work and determination, parts of Greenwood were slowly rebuilt, and generations later, the world would finally start to learn about the Tulsa Race Massacre. In the aftermath of the massacre, a concerted effort to suppress the truth began. Tulsa's newspapers largely avoided reporting on the extent of the destruction, and many survivors feared retribution if they spoke openly about what had happened. For decades, the events of May 31 and June 1st were left out of Oklahoma's history books, and conversations about the massacre were muted, particularly within the white community. The survivors and their descendants, however, remembered and preserved the story, passing it down through generations. The massacre became a hidden chapter in American history, its legacy suppressed by shame, denial, and racism. Greenwood's destruction served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of racial envy and systemic injustice. But it would take years before the story of the massacre began to re-emerge in public discourse. Today, the Tulsa Race Massacre is no longer a forgotten chapter. Thanks to the courage of survivors and activists, the truth of what happened in Greenwood is now part of a broader movement to recognize and honor the contributions of Black Americans in building the nation. The massacre is a reminder of the heights Black communities can achieve, even in the face of systemic racism, and the lengths some would go to erase that success. It forces us to ask hard questions. How can we make sure that history like this isn't repeated? What does it mean to truly achieve justice and equality? The legacy of Greenwood lives on as a call to action, urging us to remember, reflect, and commit to a future where communities like Black Wall Street can thrive without fear. Recognizing this history is about more than just Greenwood. It's about acknowledging the resilience of Black communities across the nation and the importance of addressing the legacy of racial injustice in America. The Tulsa Race Massacre holds lessons for all of us today. It reminds us that history matters, and the stories of communities like Greenwood are crucial to understanding where we've been and where we're going. When we honor the memory of Black Wall Street, we honor the legacy of a community that refused to give up on itself, even in the face of unimaginable loss. So, how can we ensure that Greenwood's story continues to be told? How can we support Black communities in reclaiming their history and shaping their future? Join us in remembering the Tulsa Race Massacre and all it stands for. Let's work together to ensure that the story of Black Wall Street and its spirit of resilience lives on. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and stay tuned for more stories that bring history's forgotten moments back into the light.